So, welcome everyone. And this weekend, today and tomorrow, we will be looking at this topic of death and dying, specifically how we ourselves can prepare for our own death and how we can be helpful to others who are dying. So this is a topic that's somewhat controversial because many people are uncomfortable about the topic of death and dying, and I don't know how it is in Israel, but in many countries it's almost a taboo subject. Like, people don't like hearing about it, talking about it. They might try to hush you up if you bring it up in a conversation. Oh, let's not talk about that. Is it like that here?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Definitely.
I think
it's bad luck.
It's universal. Also, I lived in Singapore for many years, and the Chinese have this view that it's actually superstition. If you talk about death, then it might happen sooner. So, yeah. Well, the Buddhist position on this is that we're all going to die. It's the reality. It's something that's going to happen to every one of us. And if we avoid talking about it, thinking about it, learning about it, then when it happens, we're not going to be prepared. And it's important to be prepared for death. That being prepared will affect how we handle it, how we deal with it. If we meet death totally unprepared, there's a good chance that our mind will be overcome by disturbing thoughts and emotions like fear and sadness and regret and all kinds of unpleasant states of mind that we won't know how to handle because we never learned how to handle those before. And so there's a possibility that our death will not be a very nice one, a very good experience. And it doesn't have to be like that. Death can be a peaceful experience. It doesn't have to be frightening and horrible and painful. It can be peaceful. I know that firsthand because I was with my mother when she died, and she had a very peaceful death. It was kind of amazing. I'll talk about that later. But and there's lots of stories, especially I think in religious traditions, of people who follow a religious or spiritual tradition during their life, and that helps them be prepared for death. So when they meet death, they meet it with dignity, with calmness, with peace, even with joy. It's even possible to be joyful. Maybe that sounds hard to believe, yeah? But it's possible. It's possible to meet death with joy. But being able to do that depends on making some preparation and not avoiding the whole subject and trying to sweep it under the rug and let's not talk about that, let's not think about that. So from the Buddhist point of view, it is very important to be prepared for death. And even before we ourselves die, we will most probably experience the death of other people, like people we're close to. I'm sure we have already done that. All of us have known people who have died, people in our family, friends, people we work with, and so on. So we've experienced the loss of other people, the deaths of other people. And again, if we're not prepared for death and dealing with death, then it can be very difficult to know what to do, how to manage that situation when a loved one is dying. I heard a very sad story some years ago. I heard about this young woman, I think she was in her early 30s, and she got, I don't know what, cancer maybe, and was, terminally ill and approaching death. And all her friends deserted her. I mean, I can understand it. They probably didn't know what to say. They probably just didn't know how to deal with this, this situation, because they're moving on in life, their careers, their families, and so on, and they just didn't know how to relate to this person who's the same age as them, but is going to die soon. So they probably just didn't know what to do and didn't know what to say. But that was very sad for her, you know, to be deserted by her friends. And also sad for them. I'm sure they didn't feel good about that. You know, they probably felt some guilt, some regret. But that's just like a worst case scenario of what can happen if we don't prepare ourselves for death. We won't know how to help our loved ones, family, friends, and so forth, when they are going through that experience. And that could lead us to experience some regret later on. So, anyway, Buddhism says it's important to think about death, even meditate on death, and prepare ourselves for it. And that will help us both when we ourselves are about to die and also when people we know are getting close to death. We'll be able to be with them in a helpful way, in a compassionate way, which is, I think, what we want to do. We want to be able to help our friends and our loved ones going through that experience. It's probably the most difficult experience of our life. I think naturally we want to be able to help people. But we need to develop ourselves to the point where we can do that. So I think you all received a copy of this little booklet that I wrote, which is called Preparing for Death and Helping the Dying, I think. And did anyone read it? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I'm not going to go through, you know, every part of the book. I'll try to cover the main points, but I also want to add some additional things which are on here. Quite ambitious, a lot to cover. So I thought we'll go now until about maybe 12:15, and then we'll stop for a lunch break. Maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes lunch break should be enough, and then we'll start again. Okay, so first I'll just talk about some of the attitudes that Buddhism has about death and dying. Those are in the book. So if you haven't read it, you can read it later to get more detail. But I'll just quickly cover them. Because most of us, I'm sure, were not brought up Buddhist, right? I was brought up Catholic, and maybe some of you were brought up in a Jewish family or in a non-religious, atheist environment. Yeah. So we meet Buddhism when we're already, you know, adults, most of us, and we've already learned other things from our religion, our family, our society, and so on. So I think, yeah, so for us, Buddhism is a new thing. It's unfamiliar. So I put together a list of things that Buddhism says regarding death, just to help us look at a different perspective than the one we were brought up with. So the first one is that death is a natural part of life. It's something natural. And that may seem obvious, but I've heard that some people have this idea that death is a kind of like a sign of failure. Yeah, when people are diagnosed with some terminal illness, they may think, what did I do wrong? Like, I'm a bad person. I did something wrong. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. Have you ever encountered that idea? Mm-hmm. Yeah?
No, but people say, why did I deserve this? You know, why am I the one? Yeah. Sometimes that's the
as if it's
approach.
A punishment, almost.
Exactly.
As if it's a punishment. What did I do? And from the Buddhist point of view, that's completely not true. We all have to die. It's something that's going to happen to every one of us. Of course, it happens at different times in our life, and it does sometimes happen to people when they're still young, even children. Even little kids can die, or teenagers, or people in their early adult years. And of course, there's many who live to be in their 80s and 90s, and even over 100. I just saw an article recently about this couple who are both over 100, and they were just celebrating their 80th anniversary. Can you believe that? 80 years married, and they're still happy and loving each other, but they're both, you know, like, bodies are a little bit falling apart. But anyway, that, there are people who manage to live a long time, but maybe the oldest is 115, 116, 170. That's the maximum. Nobody lives more than that. But anyway, we all have to go at some point. So it's not at all correct to think that there's something wrong with us if we get a terminal diagnosis or we die, before we're really old. There's many different factors, many different causes and conditions for why death happens, and thinking that it's a punishment or that it's a sign of failure, it's just going to make it worse. That's just going to make the whole experience more difficult. So better to put that idea aside. Okay? But don't think like that. It's something that happens. Even the Buddha had to die, Jesus had to die, the Dalai Lama is still alive, but one day he's going to pass away too. So it's going to happen to everybody. And then what death is, according to Buddhism says we are a combination of a body and a mind. Basically, that's like a very basic explanation. We have a body, a physical body, and we have a mind or consciousness, which is said to be a non-physical thing according to Buddhism. That's the part of us that feels and knows and thinks and has emotions and dreams and all these kind of things. The conscious part of us. And according to Buddhism, when we die, it isn't the end of everything. It's not like everything goes out of existence, everything stops. But it's actually the point at which our body and our mind separate. The mind separates from the body, leaves the body, and it continues to exist. And it will take another life. If we haven't reached enlightenment or nirvana, then it's going to take another life, a rebirth. And this goes on and on, life after life. I'm sure you've heard that before. But anyway, that's the meaning of death. That's what death is. It's the point at which our mind, our consciousness, this non-physical part of us that knows, that experiences things, separates from our body. And later we'll look at the kind of stages. There's actually a process whereby this happens, different stages, and we'll look at that later. So our mind continues to exist after we die. Some people may find that comforting. One reason for feeling fear of death is that it's a total annihilation, a total going out of existence. I met somebody once who told me that whole idea was just terrifying for him, to just go out of existence, become nothing. I said, well, don't worry, it's not like that. You don't become nothing. It's just a transition. It's just a gateway, like a gateway to another life, according to Buddhism. But maybe for some people that sounds scary. Some people might like the idea of going out of existence. Anyway, you can decide for yourself what you want to believe, but that's the Buddhist view, that death isn't a total end or annihilation of our existence, but it's just a transition, a change from one life to another. So that's for you to think about, explore, decide whether or not you can believe it. And then a third point is that Buddhism says it's important to be aware of, to be mindful of death, and not avoid thinking about it, denying it, pretending it's not going to happen. That's not helpful at all, as I mentioned before, because then we won't be prepared for it when it happens. So it is important to think about death, to live our life with the awareness that it's not going to last forever. And the benefit of that is that then when death happens, we'll be ready for it, we'll be prepared for it. Of course, we do have to do things to be prepared for it. And I'll talk about that more later. That's a big part of this course. How to prepare. What can we do to prepare for death? There's lots of different things we can do. And so being mindful of death is important. Another point is that we don't have to be afraid of death. Death isn't necessarily scary, horrible. And that's probably one reason people don't want to think about it or talk about it, because they think it's going to be a horrible experience. Let's not think about that. But that's not true. Like I mentioned, I was with my mother when she died. It wasn't a horrible experience. And I also knew this woman in Australia. I tell her story in the book, Inta McKim. And she was actually a therapist, psychotherapist, Jungian, an analyst. And she was the director of a Buddhist center in Brisbane, Australia. And she got to her, I don't know how old she was, 60s, 70s. She had cancer. And so she knew she was going to die. And she just stopped working and spent the last something like 6 months of her life in retreat. Basically, she did retreat. She was doing lots and lots of practice, lots and lots of meditation to prepare herself for death. And she wrote a letter to our teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in which she said how happy she was. She said, "This is the happiest time of my life. It's like a party." I don't know if that's the word she used, but anyway, she said she was really, really happy because she said it's so wonderful to finally accept impermanence, to accept that things are subject to change. I'm not going to last forever. I'm not going to be here forever. So she finally accepted that, and she got herself ready for it. And she was ready for death when it happened, and she was in a calm, I wasn't with her, but I heard that she was in a calm, peaceful state of mind. She had friends, Buddhist friends and family around her when she died, so it was quite a positive experience. So there are many stories like that of people who don't have terrible deaths, and they can even have a very positive, peaceful experience at the time of death. So that's important to understand, that it isn't necessarily a bad experience. It really depends on how we prepare for it. And like in my mother's case, I think it's because she was a very devout Catholic her whole life. And she really believed in God and had faith in God, trust in God. Because, at some point somebody asked her, "Aren't you afraid?" And she said, "No. Because God has looked after me my whole life, and I know He's going to look after me now." So that certainty gave her confidence, gave her peace of mind. And I really did. I was kind of watching, to see, would she be scared? Would she have attachment to her family and her house and her things? I didn't see any sign of that. She really was peaceful, really ready to let go, ready to go, and she did go very peacefully. So for me, that was a, first-hand experience of how it is possible to die peacefully without fear, without all these other disturbing emotions that can come up. And also another thing, I think people are often afraid of pain, right? That's a big scary thing. And my mother had cancer. Her whole internal organs were full of cancer. And she died at home, but she was under the care of hospice, a hospice service. And they gave us a little package of medicine in case, including some morphine, just in case. But she didn't need it because, and everybody was kind of surprised. She didn't have pain. Normally you do have pain with cancer. And after she passed away, I met somebody who had been a nurse for many years and had seen many people die, had been met with many people who had died. And I told her about this experience. She said, well, in her experience, the state of the body and level of pain really depends on the state of mind. And if a person is in a state of mind where they're afraid or angry about what's happening to them, they're not in a good state of mind, they're in a negative state of mind, they have more pain, more physical pain. And even if you give them pain medication, it may not work. Whereas the people who, like my mother, who are peaceful, positive, in a good state of mind, have less pain or no pain. And even if they do have pain, the medication will work for them. And I've heard that from other sources as well. There's a correlation between the state of mind that we have and what's happening in our body and whether we have pain or not. So that's another reason why it's so important to prepare ourselves for death, to learn how to keep our mind in a positive state. Because then there's less chance of having pain, and even if there is pain, we'll be able to manage it better. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, so... And then, of course, Buddhism says there's the possibility of being free from having to die and take rebirth over and over and over again. Buddhism says we've been doing that already so many times. We've had many deaths before. This is not a new thing. This will not be our first time dying. We've died many times before. And we keep dying and taking rebirth again and again and again. I know that's probably hard for many of you to believe, but this is the Buddhist view. But it's possible for us to reach a state where we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to die anymore and take rebirth. We can reach what's called nirvana, liberation, a state where we've freed ourselves. We've become free of the causes of suffering, the causes of death and rebirth and all these other problems we have in life. So this is something the Buddha achieved, and many of his followers up until the present time have experienced this, have discovered this, have attained it. So it's a possibility. You don't have to believe that, but anyway, that's part of the Buddhist view about death. It's not something we have to keep going through forever and ever and ever and ever, but we can be free of it. So let's get back down to the present, this life, and how to be more prepared for death. So any questions so far? Anything you're dying to ask? Sorry. So, as I mentioned, according to Buddhism, it's important to be prepared for death, to be mindful. That's right. It's important to be mindful of death, to not avoid this subject, but live our life with awareness that we are going to die. So there's actually meditations on death. And I thought we could do one of these meditations, which is found in the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, called the 9-point meditation on death. And it's a very powerful, very, very, very powerful meditation. And it's not in the little booklet that I sent you, but it is in the book that I wrote called How to Meditate, which you might have. I don't think there's a Hebrew translation of that, but anyway. But there's probably other sources of it as well. And I can email it to you if you're interested. I can email you an explanation, a more in-depth explanation. But anyway, it's got 9 points, and the 9 points are divided into 3 groups. And these 3 groups are sort of 3 main topics that we meditate on, and then each of those has 3 subtopics. So the first of the 3 main topics is the inevitability of death. Just the fact that death is definitely going to happen and there's no way we can avoid it. Okay, so again, that may seem obvious, but because we do have the tendency to, avoid the subject, not want to talk about it, not want to think about it, so then we probably, and actually what they say, and I think it's true, I can see this in my own experience, even though up here intellectually, we would, if somebody asks, are you going to die one day? We'd say, of course, I know I'm going to die. We're all going to die one day. Up here, but down here, when it comes to our feelings, our gut level feelings, our heart level feelings, we tend to have the feeling, no, I'm not going to die. We tend to feel as if our life is just going to continue on and on and on and on forever. We don't really conceive of ourselves as mortal beings. Does that make sense? Can you see that in your experience? We tend to feel as if we are immortal. It's wishful thinking, because we don't really want to die. We want to keep going. And so that's why it is important to contemplate this, to really bring this knowledge deeper into our being, get used to the idea. And of course, initially we're going to feel uncomfortable about it, but the more we think about it and familiarize ourselves with the idea of dying, then the more comfortable we become. Because we realize, well, I have to accept it. Denying it, avoiding it doesn't help, but accepting it does. It's wise to accept that we're going to die. And then the second of the three main points, I'm just briefly talking about it now, and then we'll do a meditation together so you can experience it. So the second of the three main points is the uncertainty of the time of death. So what that means is we don't know when it's going to happen. So even if we get to the point where we accept, yes, I'm definitely going to die, I know I'm going to die, we may still feel, oh, but it's not going to happen soon. Yeah, it's way off in the future, many, many years away. So hopefully that's true. But we just don't know. We don't know when it's going to happen. And there are different reasons for that, such as, there's no definite lifespan in our human world among human beings, right? It's not that we were all guaranteed a certain number of years, like 85, okay? That would be kind of nice if we all knew that we were going to have 85 years of life. And then that's it, Then we can sort of plan our life and make sure we do everything we want to do before death happens. But it's not like that. And we know that. We all know people who've died even before they're at the age we are at. I was just talking recently with Annette. Ina. Your boyfriend's colleague who had a heart attack?
He was at his age, 35.
35 years
Just
old.
a heart attack.
Having a heart attack, right? So, and then there's people in their 20s who die, teenagers who die, little kids, even babies, okay? So people die at all different ages, all different stages of their life. So there's no certainty how long we're going to have to live. I'm 67 now, and I think, wow, I know people who've already died before they've reached this age. It's kind of amazing that I'm still alive. But don't know how much longer. And another reason is there's many different ways that death can happen. The most common, apparently, is disease, illness. Heart attack, I think, heart disease is the #1 killer. Cancer is also pretty common. What's another one? Stroke. So those are kind of the three main diseases, but there are many, many other diseases. And then there's accidents that can happen, and war. Yeah, so death sometimes happens because of other human beings. People who commit murder, terrorist attacks, war. A few people, I guess, get killed by animals or insects, poisonous, maybe not in Israel, but in Australia, for example. There's lots of poisonous spiders there, so people sometimes get bit by a poisonous spider, a poisonous snake, and die. So there's many different ways that death can happen. And another point is that our life is actually quite fragile. We tend to feel, when we're in good health, we tend to feel I'm strong and I'm healthy and almost invincible, almost like nothing could, take me down. But when you think about it, it doesn't take that much. For example, a bullet. Bullets can be really, really tiny. But a bullet going into the right place, one of the vital organs or the brain, very quickly you're gone. And then things like viruses and cancer cells, they're so tiny. you can't even see them with our eyes. You can only see them under a microscope. But these incredibly tiny little things can destroy our life and cause us to die. So our life, our body is not that strong or invincible as we may think. It's actually quite fragile. Also, another thing they say is there's a kind of irony that even things that are meant to prolong life, save life, keep us going, can sometimes be the cause of death. Like food, right? I mean, we need food. We have to eat food in order to survive. But sometimes food becomes the cause of death. Yeah? Sometimes food is contaminated, poisoned, or you eat too much. And that leads to, obesity and other kinds of problems. Or also sometimes I hear these stories, this is probably very unusual, but people choke on their food. Mm-hmm. I heard about a guy who was eating potato chips. You know potato chips?
Yeah.
Huh? Potato chips. Crisps, they call them in England. So a potato chip went down the wrong way, I guess the windpipe, yeah. And he started choking and died before he could get help. And also I heard of somebody who died eating a little sweet, like a cough drop or something in his mouth, and that went down the wrong way and he choked to death. So even eating can be a cause of death. And also medicine. I mean, medicine is supposed to keep us alive, but that can be the cause of death if we take the wrong dose or we have a reaction to it. Or there's also cases of people who go into a hospital to be treated for one illness and then they get another illness in the hospital that can lead to death. So this all sounds very gloomy, but it's just the reality. It's just the reality that our life is not as kind of solid and permanent as we would like it to be, because there's all these different factors that can lead to death, even when we're still relatively young. And then the third of the three main points in the meditation is looking at what will be helpful for us at the time of death. Given that we're definitely going to die, we don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen any time, really, even this year, even this month, even today. Possible. We don't know. So that brings a sense of kind of urgency. Well, what can help me at that time? We probably naturally feel a wish for help, something that can help us. And what we normally turn to for help are things that may not be helpful for us at the time of death. Probably the number one source of help is our loved ones, the people we are connected with, our family, our friends, and so on. And they might be able to give us a certain amount of help if they're there, provided we can't be sure they will be there. But even if they are there, they can help us to a certain extent. But at a certain point, when we're dying, death is actually a process, according to Buddhism. And at a certain point, we become disconnected with the outside world. We can no longer see or hear or talk and move our body. So then we can no longer connect with our loved ones, even if they're right there around us. And we're going deeper into our own mind, deeper levels of our own mind, our own awareness. And then we're going to be alone. Our loved ones can't be there and go with us through this process of dying. So what help they can give is limited. And another thing we normally get help from in our life is our material possessions. Our wealth, our house, our clothes, our toys, adult toys, things that we like to play with, like phone and iPad, computer, and so on and so forth. So during our life, we get a lot of pleasure with these things. But when we die, we leave them all behind. None of them can go with us. You can't, even your phone, you can't take your phone with you to the next life. So, and our money, even if you're a billionaire, right? You can't even take 1 cent of that with us. So it's just our mind. According to Buddhism, it's just our mind that goes from this life to the next, and our money, wealth, possessions, and so on can't go with us. Then our body is another thing that can give us some help and pleasure while we're alive. We enjoy ourselves with our body, lots of fun things we can do. But when we die, we even leave our body behind. Even this body that's been with us, our constant companion from the time of birth, from the time of conception even. But again, death is the point at which our mind will separate from this body. So we even leave our body behind. Our body, this body. Even if you're incredibly fit, like Seagal's husband. What's the term for this ultra man?
Huh?
Ultraman.
Ultraman, yeah. Even if you're an Ultraman, incredibly strong and fit, even if you're Mr. America or Miss America or whatever, and you have great muscles and a lot of physical attributes and so on. But that has to be left behind. Even that can't go with us. So it's only our mind that goes from this life to the next. So that hopefully gets us to realize the importance of learning about our mind and learning to work with our mind, learning to manage our mind. So, I mean, the punchline to this meditation, ideally what we come to, is to understand the importance of working on our mind. And that's really the essence of Dharma. When we use the term Dharma, that's the term we use to talk about Buddhist teachings, Buddhist practice, Buddhist path. We say Dharma, learning Dharma, practicing Dharma. So it said that it's only the Dharma that can really help us at the time of death. What does that mean? Well, one meaning of that is if we have learned some Dharma during our life, if we've learned even basic mindfulness, for example, the practice of mindfulness, that can be enormously helpful as we're going through the process of dying. Just to be able to manage that whole situation. There's a wonderful book, and they made a movie out of it called Tuesdays with Morrie.
Yeah.
You know that one? That's beautiful. So he was practicing mindfulness. He had learned mindfulness, and he was using mindfulness as he was approaching death, and it really did help him. And you don't even have to be Buddhist to practice mindfulness. Anybody can practice mindfulness. No belief necessary. It's just a question of learning the practice and working with it. Because it's basically about learning to understand your mind and work with your mind and not get totally caught up in and carried away with emotions and crazy thoughts that might come up in your mind. But just learning how to manage your mind. So that can be incredibly helpful at the time of death. But there's other practices as well we'll go through later. For example, loving kindness. The practice of loving kindness and compassion is enormously helpful to keep your mind in a positive state. I mean, there's scientific research about the benefits of compassion, how it helps both physically and also mentally to keep you in a good state. So if we can die, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, that's the best thing to have in our mind at the time of death, compassion. Having compassion. And it's possible. It is possible. If we train ourselves during our life, we'll be able to feel compassion at the time of death. And that's a very positive state. The Buddhist, according to Buddhism, the most important thing is to try to have a positive state of mind when we die. Die with a positive state of mind. So positive can mean compassion, loving kindness. If you know about emptiness, you're familiar with emptiness and you can meditate on emptiness at that time, that's great too, but that's more difficult. Compassion is easier. But again, we have to learn and practice and train while we're alive to be able to do that at the time of death. Another thing too is if you can accept that death is not a final end, but is a gateway to another life. We're going to have another life after this one. Then what's important there is to see the importance of karma, that we go to the next life with as much good karma as possible and as little bad karma as possible. That's going to go with us. Our karma. That's something that will go with us. Our body, our money, everything left behind, but our karma will go with us to the next life. And that's actually what will determine our experiences in our next life.
There is a beautiful sentence that says, the people I hurt won't go with me, but the karma would stay with me forever. So the people won't stay, but the karma will stay.
The karma will stay, yeah. Well, it's not quite as extreme as that, because karma can be purified. if we don't purify, I mean, we can purify our bad karma. So if we do some bad things, we can purify that and not have to experience the suffering that would come otherwise. But if we don't, then that will go with us and could be the cause for unpleasant experiences, bad experiences in our next life. So this is another lesson to be learned from awareness of death, the importance of living our life wisely, skillfully, meaning we try to create as much good karma as we can and try to avoid creating bad karma. I mean, it's hard to totally avoid that, but try to minimize our bad karma and purify whatever bad karma we do create so that there's more good karma and less bad karma when we end this life and go to the next one. So that's just a rough overview of the meditation. And I thought we could do the meditation together, just so you can get some idea of it. So this will be a guided analytical meditation, meaning thinking about these topics and trying to get experience of them, deeper understanding of them, because that's transformation. That's how we transform our mind and help our mind be more wise and more positive, less unwise and negative.